Good afternoon and welcome to the second annual Hearst Community Initiative Town Hall Speaker Series. My name is Evan Zislis. I'm the Director of Community Engagement for the Aspen Institute's Hearst Community Initiative. The work of HCI is focused on promoting dialogue, increasing understanding, and facilitating opportunities for meaningful collaboration among the communities of Aspen to Parachute, Colorado, located on ancestral lands of the Ute people. Today is the fifth event of an 8-part speaker series in a collaboration with the regional public libraries and chambers of commerce of Aspen, Basalt, Carbondale, Glenwood Springs, Newcastle, Silt, Rifle, and Parachute. Throughout the series, interested stakeholders will tune in to learn more about the issues facing our communities and the local experts working to find collaborative solutions to the shared challenges of our region. Today's topic is restorative justice, the future of criminal justice reform, co-hosted by the Newcastle Branch Library and the Newcastle Chamber of Commerce. Today's Zoom host is Garfield County Libraries, and interpretation to Spanish is brought to you by Velasco Language Services. Alex, can you give us some instructions for selecting the language of her choice?
Of course, let me just take a couple of minutes to share my screen. As Evan mentioned, this is a webinar format. We have a couple of options when it comes to communication. If we simply have a quick comment or have some issues with our technology, let's use the chat option. That will kind of get us going quickly. If you do have a question about the topics, a question for our panelists or presenters today, please use the Q&A. This will save the question for a more appropriate time to answer it later in the presentation. And finally, we are presenting this in Spanish and English simultaneously. If you find that gridded globe icon on your Zoom options on the bottom right of the toolkit or toolbar, click on that and make sure you're in the language of your choosing, either English or Spanish. If you get some feedback, make sure you click on Mute Original Audio. Again, if you need any help with these functions, get to me on the chat and we'll get you going as soon as we can. Back to you, Evan.
Thanks, Alex. So once again, please use the chat for technical questions, and you can ask questions for our panel using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll leave time at the end to answer as many questions as possible. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so I want to introduce our moderator and our esteemed panel for today's discussion. First, Dr. Douglas Wood. Dr. Wood is director of Aspen Institute's Criminal Justice Reform Initiative. He began his career as a public school teacher, and while a graduate student at Harvard, worked as a consultant with the Urban Superintendent's Program, the World Bank's Office of East Asian Affairs, and taught at the John F. Kennedy School of Government. Dr. Wood received the 2018 Alumni Council Award for Outstanding Contributions to Education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and is a board member of the Partnership for College Completion. Dr. Wood holds a BA degree in history from Wofford College, a master's degree in English from Middlebury College, and a master's and doctoral degree from Harvard University. He's a member of Phi Beta Kappa and holds the honorary degree of Doctor of Letters from Middlebury College. Next up, Alice Price. Alice holds an RJ practitioner seat on Colorado's Multidisciplinary Restorative Justice Council and currently serves as the council's chair. Her involvement with restorative justice in Colorado dates to the early 1990s. She was the founder of the Center for Restorative Programs, community-based restorative justice program serving the 6 counties of the San Luis Valley, where she's served as executive director for 15 years. Alice currently focuses her work on restorative justice policy development and implementation at the state level. Next, Deb Witzel. Deb is founder of 3 Stories Consulting, where she mentors, trains, facilitates, and does program design and development with an eye toward a restorative culture shift. She got her start in 2004 with the Longmont Community Justice Partnership and was executive director there from 2008 to 2013. There she supervised an amazing team of staff and volunteers and worked in partnership with law enforcement, schools, and the criminal justice system. In 2013, she became the first state coordinator for restorative justice in the State Court Administrator's Office of Colorado, serving the Restorative Justice Council as staff. In 2017, she served in the 20th Judicial District's Probation Department until 2021. She is currently the president of the Colorado Coalition for Restorative Justice Practices. Next, Mary Bess Bolling. Mary Bess has 8 years experience in nonprofit work, beginning her career at a YMCA in Iowa, now entering her second year as the Restorative Justice Coordinator for YouthZone, a nonprofit serving youth and families from Aspen to Parachute, Colorado. Her 15 years in the service industry has familiarized Mary Bess with a broad range of people, their stories, and their values. On what brings her to this work, Mary Bess says, "The healing I've both witnessed in others and experienced personally has always been in community, never in isolation. If we're having tough, meaningful conversations with young people, we're holding space for them to take accountability and to transform." Finally, Tony Hershey. Raised in Aspen, Tony is Deputy District Attorney in the 9th Judicial District. He has worked for the DA's office for 17 years. For much of that time, he has been assigned to Juvenile Court in Garfield County. He also serves on the Glenwood Springs City Council. We're honored to have everyone joining us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Doug.
Thank you so much, Evan. And I want to echo what you just said. It is an honor to moderate such a distinguished panel. When I was at the Ford Foundation as a program officer, I actually had the opportunity to fund restorative justice practices in Detroit public schools and saw all the benefit of that work. And all of us across the country have always looked towards Colorado for leadership in this area. And so I want to turn to Alice. And I would also invite everyone else to join in to the conversation around these particular questions. But Alice, could you tell us a little bit about the history of restorative justice practices in Colorado going back to the 90s? Tell us a little bit about the policy and legislative challenges and opportunities, and also the challenges and opportunities that you see today in restorative justice practices in Colorado.
Thank you, Doug. I'd be happy to. There's a really rich history of restorative practices and implementation in Colorado. And when I think back to my early days in the field, there were 3 or 4 really core community-based programs that trained community volunteers to provide opportunities for restorative justice in different models that they were using at the local level, primarily targeting young people. I think that was the first arena that we sort of moved into in Colorado in a strong way. And at that time, the culture shifts had really led to overcriminalization of youth behaviors. And a lot of us who are working in local communities were very concerned about this and looking for alternative ways to address harms that were often in the sort of normal range of adolescent behaviors and were suddenly ending up in this school to prison pipeline, as we began to call it, as we became more familiar with this dynamic. And this was certainly true throughout Colorado, both in our urban and rural areas, such as the one that I have worked in for many years. And so I think that initial impetus was really to address the overcriminalization, the disproportionate impact on youth of color, and also to just try to divert youth out of getting into or deeper into the legal system, because we know the long-term impact of that can be devastating for a youth. And so that was a lot, at least from my experience, some of that early history. Within a few years, we sort of went to the other end of the criminal justice continuum, and there began an effort to really work with high risk, high impact, serious offenses with adults, and working with survivors of more severe crime who wanted to initiate dialogue with those who were responsible for those harms and who were actually in our Department of Corrections. And so looking at that into the spectrum as well and thinking, wow, what are the benefits and impacts both to those who've been harmed and those who have caused harm to also have opportunities for restorative processes at that end of the continuum. And since then, every place along that continuum has seen the growth of restorative practices. We've added diversionary practices for adults. We've had other kinds of pre-adjudication services and sentencing related restorative practices and probationary practices and reentry practices, and actually everything from early education to higher education as well. Many, many different sectors. So we've seen a blossoming, I think, that goes beyond simply that frame of the criminal legal system. And I think Deb will probably talk more about that in some of her experiences. But I think having that broader expanse and seeing that grounding history is important as we think about the future of restorative justice in Colorado. And a couple of things I want to point out, I think, that have been important here. One is that we've had over 40 references to restorative justice or related references added to legislation over the last decade or so. And admittedly, it's a little bit patchwork. We're still working on trying to make that as uniform and as understandable and enforceable as possible. But nonetheless, we had that scaffolding in our state statutes that has allowed the blossoming of these different practices and sectors that I mentioned. Sadly, this last session, we were hoping to get through some more legislation and we weren't successful. So these things come and go over time as we work on reform efforts. We were hoping to secure clearer rights for victims to be able to access restorative practices all along the spectrum of the criminal legal system, and to make sure they couldn't just be told, well, that's not available here, that we would really bolster the system and make sure services are available and accessible all along that continuum, and also to strengthen some of the confidentiality related language that we have. Our juvenile justice language is strong. Our adult code, as I mentioned, a little patchwork, is a little hard to figure out exactly what some of the confidentiality protections are and how they apply at different stages. And so that's a gap that we have, because confidentiality is one of the important elements for restorative practice, both for those who've been harmed and those who have harmed, to feel that sense of being able to be completely honest with one another without legal repercussions, negative ones flowing from that. Another seminal piece, I think, has been that the legislature created a state restorative justice coordinating council. And that's the group that I'm currently chairing, and I hold an appointed seat as a practitioner on that council. And in doing that, they created a public body that is multidisciplinary. We have 19 seats. We have everything from Colorado Department of Education, the Division of Criminal Justice, Department of Corrections, Division of Youth Services, and we also have community-based practitioners and other stakeholders. And that gives us an ongoing public entity that can really work towards sustaining long-term restorative justice implementation over time, and hopefully addressing gaps that we find. And finally, with that, I would say we have been so strengthened by the Colorado Coalition of Restorative Justice Practices, which is just an amazing network of programs and practitioners all over the state, which Deb is currently chairing. And that, hand in hand with our public counsel, has just been a wonderful collaborative foundation to pursue the goals that we have for increasing restorative justice in Colorado. I can mention sort of some things for the future, or I can wait and we can weave those in as we go. What's your pleasure?
I think we'll weave those in as we go. But I wanted to just stay on this this issue of legislation, and what do you see is important? Deb or Tony or Mary Bess, would you like to chime in on that?
I'm happy to chime in, Doug. Thanks. I feel like the legislative piece, Alice hit the two, I feel like, most important pieces, which is making sure that there is access at all levels for people who want to resolve the harm of crime this way. It's such an important and valuable opportunity for us as human beings. And it's a huge miss to not ensure that people have access. So that's a key piece. And then for folks who choose it, to know that it's a safe process. So that confidentiality piece that Alice mentioned is so important for people to know they can speak their truth in these processes. They can really connect as human beings and share their story at a deeper level than the criminal legal system invites and has space and time for. And to have the confidentiality protections is, I just feel like a really important step for us.
What about challenges and opportunities, though, Deb, as we think about an approach of restorative justice, building upon, as Alice was talking about, the amazing scaffolding that you guys have built for so many years in Colorado?
Well, there are, if we take it down to, I like to talk about the grass part of this metaphor. The blossoming that Alice was talking about is happening in Colorado, and that's because of this grassroots movement, right? We talk about the roots and the people that have been inspired by this work and really chosen to put their tenacity toward making sure this is available in our communities. The challenge is it takes time. Culture shift takes time. And we have, what is it now, Alice? It's better than 20 years, been working toward the point that we are now. And, how many times have we told people what we do and they're like, well, why aren't we doing that all the time? And I think it's because it takes time. Human connection takes time. And sharing stories, hearing stories from each other takes time. I think it's also a challenge to get the messaging out in a consistent way. And for people to understand what this shift from the punitive adversarial approach is to, like, okay, what are we doing now? And, this work is rooted, again, back to the roots, in tribal culture. So it's been around forever, as long as human beings have been gathering. But in this modern iteration, when we talk about the shoots, there's a lot of misconception around restorative practices, like, oh, it's soft on crime, or it's kumbaya, you're gonna make me hold hands and say nice things. And that is not what this is about. So the messaging really needs to be about how difficult it is for us to sit with each other and speak our truth and hear each other at that deeper and more healing level. So that's one of the challenges, and doing something that is so heartful and human can be a hard thing for us to come together rather than be separated and represented by someone else. And sometimes that is what people want. But the access piece and making sure that people know what this is and understand what they're choosing and have the opportunity, no matter where they are, what community they're in. And, one of the things that I'm just so grateful to the RJ Council for doing is creating an RJ directory on their website, rjcolorado.org. I'm famous for putting that website out there. Y'all check it out.
That's great.
Yeah. And so at this point in time, I am so proud to say, anywhere you are in Colorado, you can find someone on that RJ directory who will provide services.
Mm-hmm.
So one last challenge I want to name is the financial challenge. Because so many people have been doing this work to, from the grassroots to the shoots now, and we've been doing it for free, but it's not sustainable. That is not sustainable. And so we have a need in this work to be compensated and to be supported so that it can continue and be sustained to the point of blossoming and planting seeds to a new generation that can have this as their field of work.
Can I just, you mentioned something that I thought was so important. I'm going to combine what you said with something Alice said, and would love to hear everyone just chime in. And that is the importance of messaging, particularly when you are considering this work from the perspective of a continuum, right? We have in our work, we call it the criminal justice continuum, because people's life experiences are not in silos, right? I mean, if the lived experiences go across the continuum. So talk a little bit about the framing of the messaging around restorative justice practices, and would invite anybody to come in. I used to have an old phrase, you either frame an issue or be framed. So just what are your thoughts on the importance of messaging on this?
And Doug, I think that's an important point. I think Alice would appreciate, sometimes prosecutors, I've been prosecuting and I started in Brooklyn 30 years ago. So I think the pendulum swings and then it swings back. And a lot of victims, particularly in juvenile court, will call me and go, my TV was stolen. And it's like, well, he's 15, but I still want my TV back, or I want him to pay for it. I'm going, well, he's 15. You're probably not going to get paid for it. And I don't know that a victim cares that much sometimes. And some victims are in a different position. And of course, that's a property crime, of course, is different than a more serious crime. But I think we have to take this as Deb said, a holistic approach, because not everything works. We can't lock everyone up. And particularly in the juvenile justice system, just since I've been doing in Colorado in the last 17 years has changed. We'd lock a lot of kids up in detention and put them in a juvenile facility. Studies show that doesn't work. It criminalizes them. It's a bad idea. Do you want to lock children up because they do commit minor crimes? No. I mean, but then there's a shooting or something and we put SROs in the school, and then that criminalizes kids because maybe the SRO is creating problems. But I think this comes, and maybe Mary can talk to this, from the schools, from law enforcement, from my office, from the defense, from the public defender's office too, that what approach can we take, particularly with kids, that satisfies victims, yes, but creates a situation where we better these people. I mean, particularly kids, but this is true with young adults and adults too. We're not going to throw everyone, Alice, in prison, right, for the rest of their lives who commit crimes. We're just not going to do it unless they're very, very serious crimes. So people are going to get out. People are going to be part of this community. It's important, Doug, for them to understand, and this is from the juvenile's point of view or for the adult defendant's point of view. Look what I did. What was the impact? I had 5 kids, maybe you remember, Mary, it was before you, who did a bunch of damage at the Garfield County Fair Center into the kitchen. Tens of thousands of dollars of damage with fire extinguishers into the exhaust system and stuff. Well, part of the punishment was public service there and working with the director of the Garfield County Fairgrounds. And I thought that was great. And they understood, hey, look, what you did ruined this event. And affected them. That's the kind of thing I really think we should have to concentrate on. With kids, it's maybe I'm a little biased that we can be more successful, but adults too. Understand what you did, give back to the community through service, and then relate with your victims and say, hey, put yourself in that position. What would you feel like if you came home and your TV was gone? You know?
Mhm.
And I think sometimes the criminal justice system, and I know it has its shortcomings, misses that. So maybe we could speak to that too, Doug. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And you mentioned school-based work, and Mary Bess, as I was saying earlier, had the great opportunity to fund restorative justice practices in Detroit. For example, I spent a lot of time with kids at Ben Carson High School in Detroit. Can you tell us about your work when it comes to school-based restorative justice practices, and particularly YouthZone's approach to restorative justice?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. I last week had the pleasure of sitting with a large group of teachers from the Roaring Fork School District. So that's from Glenwood to Basalt, so kind of in the middle of our Roaring Fork and Colorado River valleys. And they are just rounding out their 4th year of school, district-wide actually, implementation of restorative practices. And I loved what you said about messaging, because what I kept hearing was that this is not an extra thing that we just tack on or we put into a sentencing order or something, or that we add on to a teacher's workload from these teachers. This is a way of being. This is how we build community at the beginning of a school year, throughout, and we continue to come together in this relational way using Beverly Title, who I think is a Colorado native. I know she worked with Deb, so her 5 R's, and if any of those are missing, then you try to kind of go back to whatever that R is. And I'm putting up my hand because all these teachers had great little visual prompts. So but really starting with relationship. And I think in our rural communities, and Alice works in a similar community, we have small towns and we have small schools. So relationship, I might know someone who comes into a restorative conference. The community member I choose might know the person who was harmed or the responsible youth. So it's a really interesting and exciting dynamic to come into this work with YouthZone. So we do a lot of the way we approach it. We are not in schools. We're a nonprofit, separate, funded mostly by grants and a lot of individual and business donors. And we've been working in these communities, started in Rifle 45 years ago. And I just was trying to figure out how long restorative justice has been a part of our work, particularly. And I found a newsletter from 1999. I have no idea when it started, but right now we just we embed, we do that same approach. We try to embed some restorative questions into our intake process the first time we meet someone, a youth. And we also try to assess for a certain level of accountability before we go down a more the formal restorative justice path. And so our youth advocates are trained on that. And then when I came into this work, it was during COVID. So I was kind of busy learning, how do we do this hybrid? What do we do for a totally virtual conference? So as a new practitioner, that was a big challenge for me. And I've spent a lot of time on some of those logistics. So I really focused on community group conferencing to the point that I actually thought that was the only thing we could do. So luckily I've come around and I have some, my knowledge of restorative justice has really been able to take root because of what Alice mentioned at the top, CCRJP, and that kind of really robust community of support, both informal and formal mentorship, communities of practice, and just looking across all the different disciplines, like school-based and nonprofit, and in the judicial system as well, for how they approach. So we focus on conferencing, and then we pre-conferencing to get to know and build a relationship, and then we get a little bit more creative now with how we move forward with conferences. So
Can I ask you another question, Mary Bess? It's about the data for the 9th Judicial District, particularly when it comes to youth, this 5-year study. What are your thoughts about it? What were the findings? What was interesting? And anyone else, please jump in on that too, Mary Bess, after Mary Bess responds.
Yeah, so for YouthZone statistics, we see about 47% Latinx, people who identify as Latinx, and then 48% people who identify as white. So our youth, we work from ages about 11 or 12 to 18, sometimes 19, depending on if they're still in school. And it's about even for male to female, 52% male, 48% who identify as female. We have seen a little bit of an uptick on higher acuity, so a little bit of a higher risk at their intake. So we have an assessment that we do, and it gives us some data about the risk levels, and we're up at about 21% high risk. So of the kids we work with, that's 2 out of 10 are either suicidal or have had some kind of history of trauma or have a substance use disorder or issue that is quite troubling for the age that they are.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 5-year study that you were mentioning was one that RJ Colorado did, and I love the statistics that 99% of youth in this study, and it was juvenile diversion. There were a bunch of different juvenile diversion programs throughout the state who participated, but 99% reached an agreement in their conference or their restorative dialogue, all these different models. And then 91% completed their contract that they came to agreement about. So, the data is there. Alice or Deb, do you want to?
I was going to ask because Alice was shaking her head. So
Yeah.
Alice, please jump in.
That's the immediate impact. But one of the exciting things about this study, well, 2 things. One is that the youth who participated, those who had been harmed who participated, and other community members who were involved reported really high levels of satisfaction with the restorative practices, and longer term impact of the youth who did successfully complete, and there were over 1,200 youth involved in this study.
Mm.
Only 8.6 recidivated within the study period over multiple years, and that is a very low recidivism rate for youth who enter the juvenile justice system. And maybe Tony can comment. We don't have really precise recidivism statistics in Colorado. We've tried to do better to get those, but 8.6 we know is fabulous in terms of that longer term impact on behavioral change.
Mm-hmm.
And Alice, Alice, that is great. And again, I think we have some more success with children. As Alice knows, the legislature recently has been really pushing diversion, and now there's a thing called an ARNA, which is, Mary Bess will remind me what it stands for, but it's the Arizona assessment tool, that every kid is going to be screened basically, unless it's a very, very serious crime for diversion. Again, when I started here, there were 7 beds at the Juvenile Detention Center in Grand Junction for our entire district. Now there are 2. And again, locking children up is not the solution. Diversion, working with them. And as Alice said, it works because, I mean, some kids are problems and you get to see them again, but what you forget is the kid who you never see again. I know I forget about that kid because I don't see him again. And that's why the statistics don't lie, that you're not seeing this recidivism with these children. I sometimes, Mary Bess, I think I've told you this, it's like a puppy who pees on the rug. And I have 2 dogs. And if I punish them a week later, they're not going to understand. And children are like that too. So if they go into the juvenile justice system, they get a lawyer, the case is continued a couple of times. It's like 3 months later and they're like, yeah, I broke into my neighbor's house and stole some stuff. I don't remember, whatever. But if you get them right away, the first day of court, they talk to the judge, or even before they get to court, they're already dealing with YouthZone or restorative justice or with diversion, and they're already in the system, immediate consequences. It's really, really successful. And that's been my experience. And I'm thankful to the state legislature for really moving it that way. and I'm going to a conference next week where we're going to be talking more about that with DAs from around the state. I think it's just a very successful model, Doug, for juvenile justice. Adult justice is different. I'm sorry.
Actually,
Go ahead, Deb.
I'm just going to chime in about adult data because unfortunately, I'm not prepared to cite the studies, but there are studies worldwide that indicate that the adult data is parallel to the juvenile data. So we're still seeing 10% or less in recidivism data. We're still seeing above 90%, 90+% in completion data, and in the high 90s around satisfaction data. Again, all adult cases, but parallel results. And, you know, back to the messaging, Doug and everybody, like this is the kind of stuff that we really need to share. Like the consistency is there. And when it's compared to like Tony was saying a minute ago, you know, the fact is we can send people away and lock them up, but they're returning to our community and probably learned in incarceration settings to be better criminals, not heal. And restorative justice practices heal.
And Deb, part of the messaging there, I'm sorry, Deb, part of the messaging there I think is important. I think the public really wants to give kids, Deb, a break. I think most people feel that way, right? You know, he's 14 years old, he made a mistake. If someone's 34, I think they're like, well, I don't know. So I think you're successful first with the juveniles and that can transition into the adults. But I agree with Deb 100% that these success rates can be seen with children. You know, I just work more with juveniles than I do adults, but I do adult court in Rio Blanco County, for example. And we've had success with drug court, or it's called, it has a different name now, but where it's been very successful. And when there's been sort of a restorative justice angle with that too, you know, I'm a drug addict, I broke into someone's house, I stole something and that kind of thing. And it's been very successful. And I think, again, you can't lock everybody up. So I appreciate that, Deb.
Can I just also mention one other thing? I'm going to get back to asking you about juvenile courts, Tony, in just a minute, and diversion programs, as Mary Bess mentioned. But, you know, we haven't really talked that much about the role of families in all of this. Would love to hear your thoughts about that. I just opened it up to your thinking around how the importance of families involved in this work.
Well, I feel like families are the starting place, and there is an opportunity in family settings for us to take these values and principles, because that is what restorative justice practices are. It's a set of values and principles, and to use those in our family settings to bring us together when something happens in the family, and to talk about what happened, and like has been said, the impact of what happened and the effect of what happened, and then work together to figure out what the responsible person can do, no matter their size, because there's always something they can do to make things right. We're cultivating the seeds of a new generation that will come to expect this approach as the way that we address harm and wrongdoing. And so my highest hope is that we, as restorative justice practitioners and people who are supporting this work, can support this at a community level where families are learning it, and families have the support to practice this in their homes, in their larger circles of family, and to share the stories with each other of how we can do this. You know, sometimes high impact crime happens in families as well. To Tony's point about what has been called drug court in the past, I had a case where a family member was addicted and caused harm to his family. Crime occurred, and we did a process with him when he returned to the community with his mom, step-parent, and in that process, there was the opportunity for everyone to speak their truth and to ask for what they needed for him to come home in a healthy way.
Mhm.
And it's called
And-
recovery court now here. Sorry. That was
No,
the
that's all
thing.
right, Tony.
I
So
don't like, they
that's,
don't like to call it drug court. It's recovery.
yeah, that's what's possible. And, I want to shout out to the messaging piece with a podcast that I'm going to launch this year, which is a collection of stories from people's lives that have done restorative justice processes. So hopefully in that messaging, people will begin to hear the possibilities through the RJ Chronicles podcast. So I just feel like messaging is critical.
Alice, did you want to say something?
I think also with the family issue, if we want to stick with that just for a minute, particularly in working with juveniles and parents or other guardians are, obviously involved in thinking about choices and how to move forward when an incident has occurred, how to address harm, what kinds of processes they feel comfortable for their youth to participate in. And I have seen so many parents and other adult guardians, as they've watched a youth go through a restorative process, be themselves transformed and seeing new ways of things that they had not imagined, having grown up in a more punitive framework. And also those family relationships between those adult caretakers and those youth as they move through those really kind of morally transforming processes, growing up processes, those relationships become strengthened. So those are often maybe not documented, but real impacts as well on families when they have the opportunity in whatever way, as Deb said, on reentry after serious harm, or whether it's at that early stage of witnessing a different way of addressing harm.
That's great. I want to go to Tony. You've had 17 years in the DA's office. You have a font of information experiences, and I'd love to talk a little bit with you around the juvenile court system there and your thoughts about diversion. I keep in my mind Alice's, when she talked about the criminalization of young people. I funded a book by Monique Morris titled The Criminalization of Black Girls in America's Schools, which talks about restorative justice practices and how we should change the criminal justice system in that regard. But Tony, talk to us about your experiences. Talk to us about juvenile court. Talk about whatever you want around these issues, your thinking around all your years of experience.
Well, what Deb said is really true. I think that it is a lot different than it used to be. I mean, 100 years ago, children were in the same system, Doug, as adults. Maybe a little more than 100. When I first started. But we do treat children differently, and it is a good thing that we do. I think the system has changed in that we realize when kids are pretty smart. And a lot of the kids I deal with are very smart. And, you say, well, okay, we're going to try this, we're going to try that. And now we tried diversion and you keep getting in trouble. So now you're in court, now you're on probation and that's not working. So now we're going to put you in detention. And they get to go to detention, and they're young children who maybe have dysfunctional families where dad's not around and mom is working long hours and maybe they don't know where their food is coming from. And now they're in a structure in detention, which isn't so bad. And they get to learn, next time you're breaking into cars, make sure you don't light the dome light. One kid told me that he learned that in Grand Mesa. Make sure you keep the light off at night. So that sort of thing doesn't work. And then they go, okay, well, fine, I'm going to go to detention and it's not so bad. And what else are you going to do to me? Nothing. And we know that. And now they know that more. So I think the juvenile justice system, as it has evolved from In re Galt, which was the first case that really gave kids rights, to now is that we don't want to criminalize children. And whether that's in the schools or whether that's in the system, we're fortunate here to have a couple of judges who do juvenile court in Rio Blanco and Pitkin County and in Garfield County who are really great with kids and understand that while some of it can be punitive, that for the most part it is restorative, and there is a community basis, and that's in the statute in Title 19. The legislature made that a goal to restore kids and to help them function. I don't want to see these children. I feel when they're 18 or 19 or 20 and they're coming back to court and I'm like, oh no, they're in trouble again and now they're in jail. I think I always sort of feel that I've failed and that the system has failed because we didn't catch them, or we didn't prevent them, or we didn't teach them, look, there are other options here. And, some of it is socioeconomic, some of it is just the factors of being a young kid. Children do stupid stuff. Their brains aren't fully formed. That's why we have a different system for kids right now between 10 and 17. And I know the legislature, Alice, is thinking of raising that to 12 or 13, and even raising it on the other end, which I think would be a great idea. Maybe you make it 13 to 20. I think in Colorado, I think we had a juvenile justice system that maybe didn't work as well. When I was in New York, there was a separate court, the family court, but sort of the same thing that had done a lot more. I think these courts now are doing a lot of great things. And I think with kids who are not competent, kids who have mental health issues, we're really moving to a place where we're trying to help the child at the very, very beginning of the system. And because my experience, Doug, is once they get into the system, it's not criminalized, but sort of systemized and institutionalized, it doesn't help them. And there's no solution, and there's no out, and there's no end. And then we just sort of wait till they age out and like, fine, he's never going to get it. He'll be 18, we'll throw him in jail. And that's a failure for me. That's a failure for the judge. That's a failure for the public defender. It's a failure for the social workers and for YouthZone. What I really love finally about the juvenile justice system is it's such a holistic approach. In juvenile court, people are always surprised, my young lawyers who come to learn about it. There's DA, they're like, who are all these people? And I go, well, there's the probation officers there, DHS, the Department of Human Services, YouthZone, the public defender, alternative defense counsel, and lots of other different groups. Sometimes the school personnel will come, counselors or the principal, and we're all just trying to, what can we do to help this child and get them through the system? And I really like that. I wish maybe, Deb, that we had more of that in the adult system. I think that will come with time. Does that sort of answer your question, Doug? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Would anyone else like to chime in on what Tony just said?
In terms of the adult system, along with the raise the floor legislation to move the bottom level of charging age from 10 to 13 in Colorado, a large amount of funding has just passed through some of the American Recovery Funds from the federal government that have come to Colorado to really increase adult diversion services in Colorado. This will be going through our state judicial department. And although it doesn't name restorative practices in the legislation, I know the folks who are involved a lot with the planning and implementation around those funds will hopefully be promoting and providing training and making sure that all of our local judicial districts and DA's offices who are going to receive this adult diversion funding will also be aware of and hopefully open to and using what we know are good restorative practices with adult diversion as well.
And Alice, we have an adult diversion coordinator in our office now, and we're sending like a lot of low-level domestic violence misdemeanor cases through to diversion, when in the past, you know what happens with DV, and it's been very successful. So I really appreciate that. And a part of it's always about money, Doug, but that's always helpful.
I know. Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I just so appreciate the opportunity to have discussion about this important work with all of you. But we've come to the Q&A part of this session, and so even though I'm totally enjoying this, we can continue the conversation through questions and answers. So I'm going to turn it over to Evan.
Thank you so much, Doug, and to our panel. I have a little bit of history with restorative justice. In fact, Deb's program in Longmont, Colorado, is responsible for my training as a staff member of YouthZone ages ago, and I was a facilitator for during my tenure with YouthZone. So I'm familiar with the YouthZone programming. What I would love to hear more about as we think about how other communities around the country who may be hearing this, both tribal, urban, and rural communities, if they don't have a YouthZone, how can communities start to integrate these practices among their law enforcement, along their criminal justice system? How can we start to implement these systemic practices for communities that maybe don't have a YouthZone or don't have a Tony Hershey that is such a champion of RJ in their small little district. Maybe Deb, if I could ask you that.
Sure, I'm happy to start this. Alice is probably the most knowledgeable about this, having been a founder. And I'll speak to the partnerships, the community partnerships. I think it starts with the inspired, committed, like Margaret Mead said, you know, what is it, an inspired small group of people can't be stopped. Oh, that's a horrible paraphrase. Sorry, Margaret.
Close enough.
Thanks, Doug. But you know, it starts with the yes, and it's the people coming together with the commitment and the leadership commitment in partnerships and law enforcement agencies, people who are willing to take the time to be trained and to really lead this work with commitment and to do it with fidelity to practice in a way that is able to connect people in the community, you know, the Tonys of the community, the law enforcement officers of the community, the educators of the community, shout out to Doug. Those are the people who can really take their leadership commitment to the next level. And Alice, I'd love for you to speak to your founding of CRP, because yeah, that's it.
I mean, it is all about relationships. It's all about the perceived needs in communities and people holding those needs and sitting together and talking across different sectors and different communities. When we were first starting in the San Luis Valley, we had system folks at the table. There was a lot of uncertainty on their part. They weren't quite sure, but a lot of the community-based organizations who were working with youth and families were hungry for something different. And our faith communities came to the table. It was a wide range of different people who said, we need something different. What we have isn't working. You walk into the juvenile courtroom and you see who's there and, you know, the color of their skin and their family. And this is not right. This is not, we do not want our community to function this way and look this way. And so it was really those cross-cutting connections where we were able to get a dedicated core of about 12 or 15 community members who were willing to get training and begin to have what was a fully volunteer-based organization. For the first 2 years, we had no staff, we had no office. Somebody gave us, if some of you are old enough to remember the bag phones that you could put in your car and plug into your, somebody gave us one of those. We had a sort of a mobile office. We started really small, but we held on to that vision, and eventually people in the system started to see results and they were like, oh, let's talk about this. And it began to weave together over time. And every community is different as to who some of those influences are, you know, who can bring people to the table and what different community stakeholders may have investment in this type of work. But to me, that I'm sort of a community organizer at heart, I guess. It really goes back to that level of work.
I have a couple of things that I want to make sure we get to before we run out of time. We're talking about a criminal justice reform, right? Restorative justice is a fundamental departure from the inherent injustices of a system with roots in prejudice and classism and racism. We've got a question here: how do we deal with the equity issues when different DA offices are so drastically different with their approaches to the use of restorative justice, whether diversion or anywhere along the criminal justice continuum? I would like to focus your answers on issues of equity and how are we ensuring that restorative justice is equitably offered to, and people along the continuum have equitable access to restorative justice as an option for them. And I don't know if Mary Bess or Tony or even Doug, if you want to chime in on some of those issues of equity.
Just real quick, Evan, you know, the DA is an elected office and we have 22 separate DA's offices. So the Mesa County DA and the Boulder DA and the Aspen DA, my boss, are different. And I would hope that would reflect the community. But I also hope that there would be some sort of statewide evening of that, so that we do treat people wherever they are the same. And, but, DA's offices do reflect the community, and working in a district that represents Meeker and Rangeley and also Aspen, I can't think of two very different places in the state and different politically, and they want different things. But I think there can be some uniformity, to answer your question, and we can do that through legislation.
Yeah, I think too, what's helped me as a new practitioner, I just, have to call that out as a facilitator, the code of conduct that the RJ Colorado has worked to form, and is kind of a living document, constantly suggests that there are two facilitators. So we're checking each other. And then also just being in practice in Colorado, I'm surrounded by people who are kind of doing the work within themselves. I know do the work has so many different meanings, but in this case, it's kind of where racial justice and restorative justice meet, and all the other intersectionalities that we, see as ways that might disenfranchise certain people or even parts of certain people. So it really is kind of turning inward somewhat and looking at your own bias and my own lens, at least as a new practitioner. Just wanted to throw that in there.
I just wanted to add, I'm glad, Mary Bess has talked about this, and all of you have talked about the importance of the data and the research and how we should hold ourselves accountable. And I think we need to be very specific to neighborhood data, where there are spatial concentrations of high rates of incarceration and overlapping inequities, and to ensure that those neighborhoods have the same sorts of restorative justice practices in those communities as others that are less inequitable when it comes to all these different interstitial cross-sector challenges.
Oh, Doug, I'm so glad you said that. Community-based restorative justice, where the communities are, the people in the communities are the facilitators. Yes.
This is going to be a short one for people. I would love to know, how do we get law enforcement on board?
Well, same problem, Evan, you have in this district and even in the big Denver districts, multiple law enforcement agencies with different communities and different wants and needs, but it's training and it's education. And I think it is changing. I know, Mary Bess, you've seen it in Rifle change with a new chief and stuff, where I used to accuse them of picking on kids, and maybe I was wrong, but I think it is changing. In Aspen, we have a really great force, in Pitkin County, and Garfield County Sheriff's is great too, about understanding the needs of the community and the kids. But some of those are elected officials and sheriffs, Evan, like in Joey or in Aspen, and they reflect what their community wants somewhat too. But I think training and education are key for law enforcement.
And I would add participation, because when law enforcement participates in a actual restorative process, they are changed.
That's an excellent point, Deb. Thank you.
I think the relationships as well, I go back to that a lot. I have an amazing team at YouthZone, and we bring SROs and we invite other people in the force in our different communities, all the way Aspen to Parachute. Once a quarter, we bring them together and we serve them lunch. And there's just something about being able to reach over someone's hand and say, "Oh, how's it going? I was going for that bag of chips, but hey." It just becomes this informal connection, and it really humanizes and just helps it out.
So clearly, we're going to need more time for this discussion, which means I'm gonna have to circle back with all of you. I'm so grateful, Doug, Alice, Deb, Mary Bess, Tony. I can't thank you enough. To our viewers, I apologize. We've run out of time. There are more questions, but please do look these folks up. All their information will be available on our website at aspen2parachute.org. To our viewers, thank you for joining the Hearst Community Initiative Town Hall Speaker Series. This presentation was the 5th of 8 webinar events, broadcasting every 2 weeks from April through July. In 2 weeks, on Wednesday, June 22nd, from 5 to 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Our 5th event in this series will feature a discussion on broadband internet in rural Colorado, featuring Diane Cruz from NEO Connect, Kevin Batchelder, Garfield County's manager, Derek Hanrahan from the SILT Board of Trustees, which will be moderated by Governor Polis's director, Brandy Ryder from the Colorado Broadband Office. Thank you again to Velasco Language Services for your commitment to translating important information to our esteemed Spanish-speaking community throughout the region. Very special thanks to Alex Garcia Bernal and Garfield County Libraries for generously Zoom hosting this series, as well as co-sponsors Aspen Public Radio, Newcastle branch of the Garfield County Libraries, and Newcastle Chamber of Commerce. To you, our participating viewers, you are, of course, always invited to check out upcoming events and ongoing projects of the Aspen Institute's Hearst Community Initiative at aspen2parachute.org. That's Aspen, the number 2, parachute.org. I'm Evan Zislis, Director of Community Engagement for the Aspen Institute's Hearst Community Initiative. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to connecting with you at the same time in 2 weeks. Talk soon.